Okay, so we're back in the garage tonight, and tonight we're going to work on removing the flex plate, which I forgot to do in yesterday's video. So we'll remove that and we'll put the pilot bearing in, as well as remove and change the rear main seal on the back of the motor. So that's tonight's plans. Earlier today I did actually go and drop off the tail shaft to get lengthened. So that should have probably a 3 to 4 day turnaround. Now I'm still waiting on a few parts to come from Japan. There's a little bit of a delay with the service Amayama that sends out the part. A couple of suppliers were out of stock, so we may not actually get to install the manual transmission this weekend, which I was really hoping to be able to do. It may be delayed to the next week, possibly even the week after. But that's okay, it's not my daily car. We've got the Crown to daily around, so it should be fine. So anyways, I'll get under the car and we'll start working on removing that flex plate. So you can see on the flex plate we've got 8 14mm bolts. Ideally when you're doing this, you should be holding the harmonic balancer in plate with a 22mm like we did earlier when we disconnected the torque converter from the flex plate. However, I'll be using the impact gun for this just to remove the bolts. So it shouldn't actually move that much, but we'll see how we go. I'll try and work on that now. Interesting that there's quite a bit of oil on there as well, so it must seem like that the rear main seal actually has been leaking, which is good because we're going to replace that today. So flex plate is off. I'm just going to clean up a little bit of the surface there before I start working on removing that rear main seal. So the idea is to get a self-taping screw, but blunt that edge off so that it's not sharp at the end. All we need to do is match up a drill bit to that, which I have prepared here. And we'll be making a small hole with the drill, just about there. And then by using the screw, we're going to screw it in by hand, and that should actually allow the seal to pop out. So with the rear main seals, you don't want to damage the inner or outer surfaces, so you don't want to make any damage there or any on the outer rim there. That's essentially where the seal is stopping the oil from coming out. So any method to get the seal out that will cause any strain on those edges. So for example, if you're using a flathead screwdriver to try and pry it out, you're likely to scratch either one of those surfaces, and that's where you'll start having problems with the seal leaking oil. So with this method, it basically stops that from happening, and because we blunt the edge, it basically won't be doing any damage to the surface on the inner side underneath the seal. So I'm going to try and do that now. I'll firstly drill out that hole, and then hopefully if I can get the camera angle right, I'll show you guys how the seal pops out. Yeah, I managed to make that small hole with the drill bit. Now I'm basically going to put that screw in with the little screwdriver and see if that rear main seal comes out. See if I can get a little tripod here so I can show you guys how it ends up going. Okay, so yesterday didn't go to plan. I ended up trying to drill another hole, another one, trying to use some pliers to get it off. But now what I've actually found is the Toyota service manual. Basically what it says is to slice the very lip, you can probably see it better on this side, slice the very lip, and then while putting a piece of cloth underneath there, grab a screwdriver, put some tape on the end. Well, it mentioned put vinyl, but I think that meant tape because it was in Japanese, and then basically pry that up, trying not to do any damage to anything else around it. So we need to be really careful not to make any damage to the crankshaft. It does say if there is any damage to use sandpaper to sand it down. Now let's hope we don't get to that, but I'm going to try this method out. And to help it out, I've actually got a heat gun here. I had a feeling that yesterday it was a little bit too cold at night, and that's why I was having a bit more trouble getting it out. But I think if we warm it up a little bit, it may make it a little bit easier to remove. Oh, so I finally managed to crack it. The top part's off. I had to use this big ass pick to get it out. I used the same Toyota method, but normal screwdrivers weren't actually working for me. So now it should literally be, there we go, and it's out. Now I'm going to try and clean up a little bit of debris that got in there from when I was drilling. So I'll clean that up and then we can put the new seal back in. Okay, so I've greased up that rear main seal. You don't want to put too much on there, but just enough. The service manual does recommend to just put a small amount. So you can probably just see there's a tiny amount on the outside and tiny amount on the inside. Make sure you evenly spread it out. Of course, make sure that the seal area back here is nice and clean. Okay, firstly, we're just lining it up. Now just to get that first part of the seal actually in, you'll be holding it on one end and just tapping it in slowly, just working your way around. Okay, now that it's sitting in there sort of flush, we're just going to take a piece of wood and make sure that it's essentially level with the crank. Okay, so that's the rear main seal in. You can see it's got a nice flush seal there. You want to be careful not to push it in too far, but the ideal position is to keep it as flush as you can to that outer edge. Okay, now that that's now in, I'm going to wipe it down again. Just you can either use something like isopropyl alcohol or just a very small dab of brake cleaner, just to clean up the surface. I'm also going to clean the inside here because the next step is going to be the pilot bearing. So I'll give it a good clean. Now another thing you want to do before I put the pilot bearing in is, now that the seal's installed, The factory seal had a marking here basically that went from the seal onto that housing part. It was just some permanent marker, and what that does is it lets you know the next time you're going to open up and come back in here if the seal has actually moved or rotated. So it's a good indicator. If there's something going on, if you've got an oil leak later on, you can know that maybe the seal didn't actually properly seal. So I'm just going to grab some permanent marker and just mark that off. Okay, so now we're going to work on the pilot bearing. I've got a brand new one here from Toyota. So this seal is actually a Nashi brand, made in Japan. The part number for this one is 6201 NKE, and that's straight off the Toyota parts diagram for this car, for the factory manual. So I've got that straight from Japan, but I'm sure you can find a alternative one from a local bearing supplier. Now what you want to do is initially find a socket that's the same size as the outer diameter of your bearing. So I've got a 22 mil here, and that's like exactly spot on the right size. Now on the bearing itself, you want to put the tiniest amount of general purpose grease on the outer edge and a little bit on the inner edge as well. So the reason for putting it on the outer edge, it just helps it seat a little bit easier when you're pushing it in, and obviously you'll put some on the inner edge just to make it a little bit of a smooth motion when that's moving. So I'll go and do that now, and hopefully we can tap that in with a hammer and that socket piece. Now on that outer edge, when I say tiny, I mean seriously tiny. So just a very small amount on the outer edge, and we can use a little bit of that on the inner edge. You want to make sure that the bearing is super clean, no dust, no dirt, and also you want to make sure this inner edge here is also very clean. So I used acetone to clean that up. Okay, I've got the socket lined up now. All you want to do is just very lightly tap that in. Now that bearing goes and eventually stops because there's a lip behind it that'll stop it going from any further. And that lip is also there because you want to keep a bit of basically free space behind the bearing. Whenever it comes time to change the clutch next, you'll be replacing this bearing again, and there's a few different methods and they all seem to use the space that's behind there. You can look some of those methods up online if you really want to. And that's pretty much my rear main seal and pilot bearing or spigot bearing done. Now tomorrow I'm actually going to go and get the flywheel resurfaced, the one that I've actually got. It's already a Leiden flywheel, so I'll be using that with my NPC HD clutch. Now I'm still waiting on a few bits for the clutch bearing itself. So it has multiple components. I'm just waiting on a few washers and little bits and pieces. So while I'm waiting on those things, tomorrow's video might actually be me working on some of the wiring. You can see that's dangling here. Okay, well that's it for tonight. We've got the rear main seal done and the pilot bearing. But anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.